welcome to the Geomestic channel. Today's lesson is on classifying quadrilaterals. We'll take a look at 7 different types of quadrilaterals and define what it is that makes each one unique. Feel free to take advantage of the printable guided notes worksheet found in the description below if you would like to follow along with this video. So jumping right into it, first we are going to define a quadrilateral. Now this is the simplest definition that we're going to deal with today because a quadrilateral is simply a figure with 4 sides. That's it, nothing too special. Now there's a hierarchy here that we're going to break down into 3 different branches. So the first branch that we're going to talk about is quadrilaterals that have no parallel sides. Then we'll talk about quadrilaterals with 1 pair of parallel sides. And then finally, quadrilaterals with 2 pairs of parallel sides. So the first one, no parallel sides, we've got one quadrilateral, and this is called a kite. Looks like a kite. And a quadrilateral that has 2 pairs of adjacent congruent sides is the definition of a kite. So 2 pairs of adjacent congruent sides. That means 2 pairs of sides that are next to each other, touching, adjacent. And notice that the opposite sides are not congruent, it's the adjacent sides that are congruent. So this is the definition of a kite, a quadrilateral with 2 pairs of adjacent congruent sides. So that's the first branch. We're going to skip over now to the second branch, which is quadrilaterals with 1 pair of parallel sides. First one we'll look at is this guy. This is called a trapezoid. So a trapezoid, or I've heard it called a trapezium. Trapezoid or trapezium is a quadrilateral with exactly 1 pair of parallel sides, and you can denote parallel by these little red arrows right here. There's differing definitions for this one. I've seen this definition as at least 1 pair of parallel sides, but we're going to go with the definition of exactly 1 pair. And the reason is because we're going to distinguish it between this branch over here. So a trapezoid definition is a quadrilateral with exactly 1 pair of parallel sides. Stemming from that, we've got another type of trapezoid, which looks something like this. So it is a trapezoid, so it still has 1 pair of parallel sides. But in this case, the non-parallel sides, these 2, are going to be congruent to one another, the same length. So this is called an isosceles trapezoid, or a trapezoid whose non-parallel opposite sides are congruent. If you've heard of isosceles triangles, it's kind of the same idea. You've got 2 sides that are the same. Then jumping over to the branch with 2 pairs of parallel sides. First, we'll look at what we call a parallelogram. So a parallelogram, by definition, is a quadrilateral with 2 pairs of parallel sides. So both sets of opposite sides are parallel to one another. Now there's tons of different properties for a parallelogram, but basic definition is a quadrilateral with 2 pairs of parallel sides. So branching down from the parallelogram, so the next one, also 2 pairs of parallel sides, but this time all 4 sides are the same. So opposite sides are parallel, but also all 4 sides are the same. This is what we call a rhombus. So rhombus, a parallelogram with 4 congruent sides. Another type of parallelogram, once again, both pairs of opposite sides are parallel. And this time, in each corner we're going to put a little box that denotes that there are right angles here. So 4 right angles. This is a rectangle. So a rectangle definition is a parallelogram with 4 right angles. And then finally, if you take the properties of both rhombus and rectangle, you get the most specialized of all quadrilaterals, which has the properties of all of those shapes above it. So opposite sides parallel, 4 right angles, and also 4 congruent sides. A lot going on there. and that is obviously a square. So a square is a parallelogram with 4 congruent sides and 4 right angles. Okay, so go ahead and back up here. So this is the general quadrilateral, which just says it's a 4-sided shape. All of these are quadrilaterals. 1 pair of parallel sides, or excuse me, no parallel sides, 0 parallel sides, which is the kite. 1 pair of parallel sides, which is the trapezoid, where 1 pair of opposite sides are parallel, and then the specialized trapezoid where the non-parallel opposite sides are congruent, that is the isosceles trapezoid. And then moving over to 2 pairs of parallel sides, is the parallelogram. From there, with all 4 sides the same, we have the rhombus. All 4 right angles is the rectangle. And then all 4 sides the same and all 4 right angles is the square. Okay, so one thing to recognize is anything at the bottom of this chart is also anything above it. So a square has the properties of a rhombus. Does a square have all 4 sides the same with opposite sides parallel? Yeah. So a square is a rhombus, rectangle, parallelogram, and a quadrilateral. You can't jump branches, so no squares are ever going to be trapezoids, no kites will ever be parallelograms, but every isosceles trapezoid will be a trapezoid because it shares those common traits. Now, what I like to do with this information, this is a great lesson to practice some discernment in making assumptions. So you've probably seen in geometry, you have to be careful when you make assumptions. You only can work with what you know for sure. Now, as a fun little activity, we're going to classify a few quadrilaterals based on the information that's going to be given to us. And the key here is to ignore the shape that I draw and focus on the known information and kind of cross-reference that with your definitions. Okay, so let's start with this one. If I were to draw this shape, and I said, what is the most specific way that you could name this figure based on the information that I've given you in the picture? Okay, so think about what you have here. Think about what you know. What would you call that shape? Now, if you say square, you might be right. It might look like a square. Maybe you say rectangle, it might be a rectangle. But the fact here is if it's those shapes, I have to know some specific traits about those shapes. So if it's a square, I have to know that it is a parallelogram with all 4 right angles and all 4 sides congruent. Do I know that? Not really, not unless I get a ruler out and measure some things. So the best I can do here, the only thing I know about this shape is that it's got 4 sides. So what do I have to call this? I have to call it a quadrilateral. That's all I know about it. It's got 4 sides. I don't have anything else marked in this picture to give me any other information. So unless I can measure, which in this case I don't have a ruler, the best I can do is quadrilateral. Now, if I were to put some other information in the picture, for example, let's say this is what you see. Now I can kind of look back at my definitions and decide, now that I have some information, I can get a little bit more specific. So if we look at what we have, we've got opposite sides parallel. How many pairs of opposite sides parallel? We've got 2. So I know I'm going to be on that 3rd branch. And then the other thing I have is 4 right angles. So based on my definitions, a parallelogram with 4 right angles is a rectangle. Now, could it be a square? Maybe. But I don't have markings to indicate that. I don't have 4 congruent sides, or at least I don't know that I have 4 congruent sides. So the most specific I can get here is rectangle. All right, let's try a different one. See if I can throw you off. How is it going to make any sense? Based on what it looks like, you might get confused, but if you base your answer on what is given to you in the picture, it shouldn't be too bad. So once again, think about what you know, cross-reference that with your definitions. If you do so, you should be able to tell pretty quick that this has no parallel sides, and without any parallel sides, I've only really got one option, well, two options. I could say it's just a quadrilateral, but because I have adjacent sides congruent to one another, two pairs, we can say that this is a kite. Okay, two pairs of congruent adjacent sides makes this a kite. Let's try another one. So think about this one for a minute. If you go based on what it looks like, you will get a different answer than what is given to you in the picture. Careful now. Is it a rectangle? Maybe. Not necessarily. How do I know? How many pairs of parallel sides? One pair. One pair of opposite sides parallel, which is your second branch. So one pair of opposite sides parallel. We also have that the non-parallel opposite sides are congruent. This is an isosceles trapezoid. Okay, so based on the markings, that has to be an isosceles trapezoid. One pair of opposite sides parallel, non-parallel sides are congruent. Let's try one more. Okay, last one here. Hopefully this one's not too bad. Think you got it? Both pairs of opposite sides parallel, so two sets of parallel sides, third branch, and all four sides are marked congruent, which is the definition of a rhombus. Alright, that's all for today's lesson on classifying quadrilaterals. Hope you learned something. If so, feel free to give this video a thumbs up and consider subscribing to the channel if you'd like to see more lessons like this. Thanks for watching.